Hey everyone, it's Sevi. The Stellaron Hunter takeover continues as Blade and Kafka become most wanted for emptying players' wallets, and running alongside Kafka is also Belobog champion Luca, the mystery shirtless dude. These units look like very enticing pulls, so in this video I'm going to analyze what we know about them to help you decide which banners your Stellar Jades are headed towards. Let's dive in. Starting off with the first banner phase, Bladey is a 5-star Destruction Path DPS who possesses AoE damage dealing, HP self-consuming, and self-healing mechanics to survive in combat and enhance his own damage. Very reminiscent of a certain Genshin character. You can also think of him as sort of like Arlen, but way more jacked and with better gimmicks. Activating Blade's skill consumes a skill point and his own HP to enhance his basic attack for 3 turns. Enhanced attacks will deal AoE damage but not generate skill points, making him a mostly skill point neutral unit. Then his ultimate deals large AoE damage, but what's interesting is that it gets stronger the more HP he lost in the battle, and it will also reset his HP to 50%, which is one way of bringing him back or closer to death. Blade also has a charge stacking mechanic that he gains by getting damaged or consuming his own HP, and at 5 stacks he launches a follow-up attack and heals himself. A lot of his abilities will consume his own HP, but you can see that he also has life gain mechanics that play a tug of war between life and death, all for the sake of enhancing his damage. This is a fundamental trait of his playstyle, which sounds quite the thrill if you know what you're getting into, but may not be appealing to those who want something more comfy. Another very interesting aspect of his kit is his damage multipliers. Blade's abilities have both attack and max HP scaling multipliers. Depending on how good his HP scaling multipliers are upon his release, he would benefit from more HP stats than attack, as that services both his survivability and damage. You know what else services survivability? Good, healthy food. I don't have a lot of time to prep food, so I tend to crave ordering in. Something that gives me energy for content grind or fuel me for a live stream, but not so heavy and bloaty that makes me go into food coma. Well, for those of you in North America and Ontario, Canada, Factor 75 is one such option to fulfill those meal needs. Factor quickly delivers delicious and nutritious foods that just need to be heated up before you enjoy it. Their meal options are prepared by chefs to take the guesswork out of eating well. Factor also has a lot of great menu options that fit specific diets if you're on one. Their weekly menu choices are all available to check out. Plan selection and pricing on their site are very straightforward, so if you want to try it out for some stress-free meals, use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code POGSEVIJUL50 for 50% off your first box. Once you click, my description will live update to count up the purchases. Thank you Factor 75 for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Blade's build preferences will likely bias him more towards getting HP stats, which affects his stat preferences and makes it less likely he'll fight other more attack scaling units for the same relic pieces and stats, which is a good thing for farming flexibility. His best in slot seems to be the new Longevous Disciples set, and I would highly recommend farming that cavern anyway for the busted Messenger set. It might also be the same case with a new planar ornament Rudolent Arena, which is paired up with the very good Broken Keel support set. Basically, having Blade means you're getting a lot of value from those new relic farming areas. If you don't plan to pull his light cone, the Fall of an Aeon from Herta's store can be your default free-to-play light cone option. It does give attack bonus stacks rather than HP, but that's not useless, and it still has a decent damage percent bonus and high base stats. If you have a secret vow, it looks like it'll be his best 4-star option since it synergizes well with his HP mechanics and gives a more universal damage percent bonus. And if you were lucky enough to get Clara's signature cone, it should be good too on him with the benefit of added self-healing utility. Consider as well what he brings to your team roster and coverage. If you put off building Danheng because maybe you wanted to evaluate Blade first or prefer the Imbibitor Lunae form, then you're currently lacking a dedicated wind DPS. Sampo is a damage over time unit that synergizes more in DOT teams, so he's not going to overlap with the same role Blade has. In that case, Blade will give you the wind damage coverage you may need. I expect he'll slot in nicely in the usual hypercarry team templates of 1 main DPS, 2 Harmony or Nihility support slots, and 1 survival unit. But maybe he'll have a spot in dual DPS teams too, where he can act as a sort of tank DPS like Clara does alongside another DPS. Since Blade's passives and follow-up attack wants him to get damaged by enemies to also accumulate charge stacks, that might favor abundance rather than preservation teammates so that he can still receive damage rather than have it prevented. If he favors HP more than attack, that will also skew the buffer teammates that benefit him more. Attack buffers will still be okay, but it's more likely that he'll prefer those who can also provide more damage percent or crit buffs or nihility debuff effects that amplify the damage an enemy receives. Units that also have a way to buff max HP, like Bailu's bonus ability, or HP-related synergies in general, will be very good teammates with Blade. In any case, expect Blade's team synergies to grow as time goes by. So all in all, Blade doesn't really introduce anything crazy new, but he is shaping up to be a solid and strong wind DPS with very interesting HP mechanics. And I especially like how Blade has very efficient farming spots coming up in the new 1.2 areas. However, Danhung's ill form is also an imaginary destruction unit and the first dedicated imaginary DPS. If your primos can only choose between these two arch enemies competing in the same path, there's really no right or wrong answer here. But at least if you do skip Blade, it's good to know that another destruction alternative is just over the horizon. As fun as I think it would be to have Blade's destruction directed at me, I personally think the fearless Stellaron Hunter Kafka is a more interesting pick because of how she shakes up damage over time units and teams and steps on you quite nicely. One aspect of DOT teams is how a large part of its damage is dependent on the enemy taking their turns, which of course takes time. In content that has no turn limitations, it isn't that big of a problem, but in turn-restricted battles, it might be more limiting. You might see this as a sort of weakness or flaw, but it's just the nature of how DOT works. But Kafka flips that mechanic. Aside from her dealing her own raw lightning damage and applying shocked, she has the ability to instantly trigger simultaneous existing DOT effects on enemies, whether they're from Kafka or her allies. DOT stacks she triggers won't get consumed, which means they will all deal damage instantly and still produce the regular overtime damage they're supposed to deal. What was previously just damage dealt over time, that's dependent on enemy turns, can now be front-loaded damage by Kafka too. I guess that makes it damage over Kafka's time as well. And that damage boost makes DOT teams especially more effective in Forgotten Hall and Memory of Chaos stages. So since her synergy is all about DOTs, that makes her team considerations more limited but also streamlined. That has its own pros and cons, but I think it's mostly a good thing. For one, you're led to start investing in DOT units. Sampo, Luca, Serval seem to be some of her best teammates for now with DOT-focused playstyles, though other units that have DOT application on the side will synergize in Kafka teams too. Of course, not every unit in your Kafka team needs to have some form of DOT application, as other buffers, debuffers, or survival units, even without DOT, can still have very valuable utilities for your teams. But moving forward, we'll likely get more units that have support or damage capabilities plus DOT application. Even the possibility of getting more equipment that gives DOT to units isn't far-fetched, as can be seen with the Trend Light Cone giving preservation units a means of applying burn. So it's a very straightforward way of approaching team building with presumably very strong results. The template is basically handed to you, and moving forward, you just need to keep watching out for more DOT synergistic units to be released. It's not an overstatement to say that future DOT-based units will be held to the standard of how good they are in relation to Kafka. The arrival of Luca is already a good sign that Hoyo is going to be rewarding players who choose the DOT life, and soon we could get more units of different paths and different elements complementing Kafka. As for building her, the new relic sets don't seem to be all that great for her, save for the 2-piece speed set. The 4-piece Sizzling Thunder set, or mixed 2-piece sets of lightning damage, attack, and speed, look to be her current best relic builds for now. Kafka's DOT-centric kit has some implications on her stats too. DOTs do not crit, so there might also be the question if crit stats are necessary on her. Consider that Kafka is already juggling a couple of important stats: attack for both raw damage and shocked DOT, speed for better turn frequency, effect hit rate so her own shocked DOT can more reliably stick. Even break effect to some extent might be okay for her to boost her weakness break DOT. So if you try to target a meaningful amount of crit stats, that would make building her even more difficult, and it might not end up being worth having too much divided stat distribution. Her final multipliers could better indicate if building crit is really that worth it, but not needing crit stats is actually good since building her is more streamlined and she's less likely to compete for pieces with crit stats that other units could make better use of. Her free-to-play Dispenser Light Cone options are looking really nice too. She already has her free-to-play Light Cone for Mata with interesting art of her and perfect synergy that you can purchase and max superimpose from the Forgotten Hall shop. Other 4-star options are also pretty good if you have them, like Good Night and Sleep Well or Eyes of the Prey. I'm excited to see what the final details of her signature Light Cone are, but no doubt it'll be her best in slot. So all in all, Kafka has a more streamlined route when it comes to growing her power and team roster. If you're really really interested to get into the DOT lifestyle and are willing to bet that it will see a lot of growth, Kafka's the nearest thing to a must-pull for future-proofing your DOT team building potential. Otherwise, it's totally fine to skip for now, and you can just wait for her rerun and see if the DOT arsenal has developed enough to make her more enticing to pull for you. But like, why wait if you can have mom? Anyways, the third newcomer and package deal alongside Kafka is the 4-star Nihility physical unit and boxing champion Luca, who we finally get to see with his shirt on. Let's just summarize him quickly. Luca's attacks are single target focused, and he's the first character that can innately inflict bleed rather than having to rely on physical weakness breaks. His ultimate also increases the damage an enemy receives, which should affect both DOT and non-DOT sources. Through his fighting will stacking mechanic, he gets an enhanced basic attack, which deals multiple instances of single target damage and even more damage to enemies affected by bleed. Aside from dealing damage with DOT, he might do a fair amount of damage through his raw physical damage too, and he might also be an effective breaker if his attacks have good toughness reduction. Overall, Luca is best used against physical weak enemies and single target scenarios, which is great for diversifying DOT teams. Currently, Kafka's DOT teammates have more AoE favoring abilities, so Luca will be a good unit to fill in that need, and he can still have good utility even in non-DOT teams. Now to wrap it all up, is it going to be Blade or the Kafka-Luca package? Let's list down some notable considerations for each. Starting with Blade, he's a good pickup to fill in your damage needs and wind coverage. Depending on your taste though, his HP consuming playstyle might not be to your liking, and maybe you prefer characters who live less on the edge. Fortunately, HP scalings make him compete less for attack stats versus other traditionally attack scaling DPSs, and the new relic farms are very efficient for Blade owners. He also has good teammate selections already and slots in many pre-established team templates. However, there's a lot more room to add new units that can better synergize with his HP-based kit. Imbibitor Lune is also coming very soon, another destruction unit, but this time he's imaginary. And if you're in the process of building other DPSs already, then Blade isn't as urgent of a pull anyway. If you're after the daddy energy though, don't let me stop you. As for Kafka, she seems like a must-have for those who want the DOT life, as she introduces a unique approach to DOT teams. She also has a very streamlined team template and build route already that's simple enough to follow. Your DOT options may not seem so robust yet, but there's a lot more potential for her teams to grow with more DOT units and gear in the future. And best of all, her banner is a perfect starter pack for DOT team building, especially since 2 out of 3 of the 4 stars on her banner haven't been rated up before. Of course, you're set on a path to continuously invest in DOT units if you want to grow her team's flexibility and potential. It might sound like a bit of a commitment now, so if the DOT life doesn't excite you yet, you could always wait for her rerun to re-evaluate her potential. But hey, maybe you've been waiting to pull for her regardless ever since you saw her in that first intro. If that's the case, then I hope you get her. Let me know in the comments if you're aiming to pull either of these very hot Stellaron hunters, or if you'll skip for now in favor of future options. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!